Okay, let's get started. In this first chapter, I'm going to spend a little time sharing the story behind this image, my thinking behind the composition and light, and the camera work I did to capture the information. If you're here only to learn how I developed the image, I totally get it, and you won't hurt my feelings if you skip right to chapter 2. So, I took this image on Lake Bled in Slovenia in the fall of 2017. My longtime colleague David Cobb and I were leading a photography trip in Slovenia with our Slovenian counterpart Luka Senko. Luka is the premier landscape photographer in Slovenia and knows the land, weather, and light better there than anyone else. For photographic inspiration, you should have a look at his website and photography location information in destinations all over the world. Check out his Snap Guides phone app. Now, even though it's a well-known and highly photographed location, a trip to Slovenia wouldn't be complete without a visit to Lake Bled. It's picturesque to the extreme, ringed by mountains with a medieval castle on a cliff, an island with a church on it, swans, and traditional wooden oarboats called plenta. Tito, the Yugoslavian ruler, even had a lavish vacation palace here. Luka had been watching the weather closely for several days, and he selected this particular morning to visit Lake Bled because he suspected that the sunrise could be something special. And as often the case with Luka, he was right. We arrived in the dark to get the group set up, but we could already see that the conditions were promising. There's a walking path all the way around the lake, providing great views in all directions, but on the west end of the lake there's a boardwalk along the shore which gives the closest views of the island and also faces more or less east, so it's a great place for sunrise. Lake Bled is one of those places that can be busy with photographers and challenging to capture something original. Because it's photogenic and easy to access, I imagine it might soon become overcrowded, like so many other locations have, and that might keep me away in the future. But so far, my visits there have been very pleasant. The light we had this morning did its part to provide something out of the ordinary. Now, there aren't a lot of composition choices, so I focused on quality and small details. When we first arrived, the moon and Venus were low in the sky to the right, so I tried framing the scene to include them. But the light hadn't come up yet, and I didn't love the composition. I could see that the clouds to the left were going to get the best color, so I moved down the boardwalk to place the tower in front of those clouds and center it in the low point between the two peaks. This had the benefit of also creating good spacing of the castle and distant church on the left, with the hill slope and the lone building on the right. I was also pleased to see that from this spot, the entire town of Bled, which has some large buildings and lots of lights, was hidden directly behind the island. Moving just a few inches to the right and left enabled me to eventually find a spot with separation between the roof of the church and the mountain that mirrors its shape behind it. With all that set, I waited for the best light, which lasted just a minute, as is often what happens. The thin layer of mist that appeared on the lake surface at the last minute was an added bonus. A few of the workshop guests joined me at this location, while others found their own equally good compositions along the shore. To capture the frames I needed, I was shooting from a tripod with a Canon 5D Mark IV and a 24 to 70 millimeter lens at a focal length of 50 millimeters. This framed the scene as you see it, and even though I wasn't at the optimal angle to the sun for polarization, a polarizer still darkened the sky a little and cut some atmospheric haze. It also enhanced the reflected colors in the water. Now, with nothing close in the foreground, I set the aperture to f10 and focused about halfway between myself and the island. I was using an ISO of 100 like I almost always do. The dynamic range of the scene was too great for a single exposure, so I took a few images of the sky at 0.8 seconds. And then after the best light in the sky had passed, I took a landscape exposure at 3.2 seconds. In hindsight, I could have used one brighter exposure for the landscape because the island was still quite dark and it's going to require a bit of shadow recovery. That much shadow recovery is something that would have revealed a lot of noise in earlier cameras I've used, but fortunately the 5D Mark IV is much improved in this area. Still, I'm kicking myself a little bit for not getting one brighter exposure just for maximum quality. So that's a quick telling of the story behind the image and how I photographed it. In the next chapter, I'll discuss what I'm planning for the developing of the image.